I have to learn how to use glasses now. That's cool. Anyway, I am Joe Tobiason, Washington State elopement photographer based in Seattle, and I'm not going to claim to be some crazy Lightroom expert that knows everything about it, but I know a few things. And so today I thought I'd give 4 tips, tricks, tools, thingies that I find particularly helpful in the work that I do. So when I'm shooting weddings, and 90% of the time I'm actually shooting in aperture priority, which I know there's some of you that are like, oh, the horror, like just blown away by this. How can you be a professional if you don't shoot in manual mode all the time? And honestly, I don't care. As I'm shooting in aperture priority, that does leave like the slightest adjustment, so that even if I'm working in there and I have the aperture is fixed and the ISO is fixed, it does let the camera have that little bit of an option that sometimes those shutter speeds might adjust just a little bit up and down. You're in the develop module and you're going to try to sync all the photos across the scene. You therefore might have like a little bit of variation between those kind of things. And so I have one trick here that's my first one here, and that is to use a tool called Match Total Exposures. So let me show you how that works. We're going to dive right into here into Lightroom, and as you can see, this scene here is from a mountaintop elopement I did here this fall in the North Cascades of Washington State. And this scene here, everything's going to be about the same, right? The thing is, the whole scene isn't changing that much, and I know because I was using the same camera on aperture priority, none of the other settings are going to be changing very much either. But there's going to be a little bit of variance. So I'm just going to put on the preset that I'd made that day. You can see what it is in here, and I'm just going to sync it. So if I did this and I synced everything right across the bat, it'd work, but there might be just a little bit of difference in this kind of thing in the whole scene. Okay, so now you can see they've all come in here, and honestly, these all look pretty close. It looks like there's a couple here that the profile hasn't quite adjusted to quite yet, but they look pretty close, which is understandable. I mean, the scene wasn't very dynamic, but sometimes you're in a scenario where things are a lot more dynamic, and there's a lot more opportunity for the camera to mess up. So this is where Match Total Exposures comes in and is extremely helpful. So I'm going to go back into that same photo here. So now I've kind of shown what you can do when you're just syncing normally. What I would rather do is I would go through and I would sync this whole scene, but the thing that I would leave off here is I would not do the exposure. I also usually don't do transform, spot removal, crop, or masking, just because anytime you're working in Lightroom, those are extra things that if maybe you had adjusted, if it gets copied across, that can get murky and stuff. So I just usually leave those things off, and this is what the settings that I would synchronize are. So I do synchronize here, and that would take all of those settings except for those. Then, because I know this is the correct one, just go up here to Settings and to Match Total Exposures. And that right there, just now what is going to happen is that Lightroom is going through and is looking at all of those photos and is doing the math. And so it's saying that if all of this was shot at the same ISO and the same aperture, but it can tell that a photo was a little shot just a touch faster. So it's at a 32-second event. So let's say that if that 3200th of a second, let's just say for one of those images, a photo was actually taken at a 4,000th of a second, or 2000th of a second, something like that, just like a little bit faster or a little bit slower. What it's doing is Lightroom is going to go through, is going to balance those things out and make it so it all matches there perfectly. What this also allows for is so that if you're going to work across multiple scenes, so let's say these two, same camera, same elopement, but those photos are drastically different, right? So if I was in this scenario, I couldn't match this exposure, and I definitely couldn't just hit the normal sync setting straight across everything. But if I was to take this photo here and I'm going to do this whole next scenario here of her giving her vows, and so I'm going to take this, I'm going to sync it. Once again, I'm going to do the same white balance because it was about the same time of day. That one I also do sometimes turn on and turn off depending on how much variance the scene is going to. So that's on there and that's done. So we're going to slide over here to this next one. So what I would do now is I would just unclick this photo here from the previous scene. So now I have, it's just this one scene that's done. All I have to do is I'm going to go once again sync. It's going to sync all those settings and then go back and match total exposures. And it's going to once again go through and do the math so that all those photos perfectly match. And now I can go back here and I'm looking at this full set of all of those photos. And they're all as close to being a perfect match as they possibly can, and I can simply go through and pick out the photos that I like the best from this set. The second thing that I want to talk about is using the panorama mode here in Lightroom, and that's something I find to be really, really helpful, especially for a wedding photographer. If I find myself trying to have, all of a sudden in a moment where like, oh, I want to tell a little bit wider story. I want to place them into this space. Or just I want that effect, that kind of like medium format, Brenizer, whatever term you want to use for this thing, where you maintain that shallow depth of field, but you have a wider photo. And so Lightroom is actually really, really good at doing this. We're going to take it in here. We're just going to work on this photo here. So I have this little photo here, and I've got 9 photos, and you can see here that out of how I stitched them. So what I did is in this moment when I took the camera, I had it right there on the couple, and I took the photo of them, and then I kind of like swirled around a little bit, hoping to be able to make that kind of wider view while maintaining that shallow depth of field. With this, a lot of times I do try to do the initial color correction edit before I load it into the panorama stitching tool, just because for whatever reason, it does help it a little bit better, especially also if you have underexposed a photo or something like that, if you're trying to maintain highlights. By doing the color correction before you do it into the panorama tool, usually will make it a little bit brighter and more contrasty, and therefore just make it easier for the tool to stitch. Because this is on my 5D Mark IV, I'm just going to load in the preset from that day. I'm also going to turn on the lens correction in this moment, just because I do want to make sure that it's adjusting for the lens. I believe I was shooting with my Canon 50mm 1.2, and if the closer it is to wide open, it does vignette a little bit. And so I want to turn on that lens correction because it kind of helps to balance the scene out, and again, will help it so that there's less of those vignettes that are fighting each other when it comes time to put the panorama in there. Now, once again, I'm going to sync those. And just like before, I have everything except for exposure, the transform, the spot removal, the crop, and the masking turned on. Then I'm going to go up here to match total exposures. Now, all I have to do is go into here, right click on the scene. We are going up here to photo merge. So it says that it's done. Obviously, that looks terrible, right? That's not what we're going for. I basically never use spherical when it comes to these kind of panoramas, because what that's doing is creating this ball, and so it really kind of warps the frame a lot. And so anytime you have straight lines, they get really unstraight. Whereas perspective really does a good job of trying to maintain those straight lines as it is building in the frame. So in this case, even though I think that is like kind of awkward looking, if I put in here onto the auto crop, you can see I like her dress. So what do we do here? So I'm going to actually turn it back off. So I'm just going to hit merge. When I'm doing these, especially on the big computer, I found that it really does eat a lot of processor space, and it really kind of bogs down. I end up spending half of the day just making panoramas, which is a bummer. All right, so what I've kind of been alluding to with these panoramas is that a lot of times I make them, but I find that I want to refine the edges. I want them to give just a little bit more space for feet, a little bit more space for heads, a little bit of extra stuff just to make it look better. And the second half of this little tutorial in Lightroom, and this part, is to put it into Photoshop. So I'm just going to right click on those and say open in Photoshop. This one, because it is so much space out here, I'm going to do a little bit of cropping first, because I definitely don't need all that excess space down there at the bottom, and I'm going to want them a little bit closer in the frame here, just like so. Also looks like just the angles are a little bit off. It looks like they're kind of falling away from me just a touch. So I'm going to open up Camera Raw here and just pop on down to the geometry, do the manual in here, and just do a little bit of this kind of perspective adjustment right into there, because that'll just do a lot of work in helping get all this stuff lined up. Right in there, it looks like I'll have to crop one more time, but now we're really getting somewhere as far as showing how little extra space we're going to have to do. So now back here, magic wand, edit, fill, content aware. Done. Okay, so this one, it definitely is going to take a little bit more work in here, just because there is because it was such big spaces that it was trying to work with, it had a lot more kind of imperfections that it's trying to like normalize in through all of this. So I'm just trying to make that mountain look a little bit more like it actually did on the day, which is a little bit more, you know, normal mountainy Second of all, this would be the one that would take a lot more time, just because this area was so big, it got a little bit funky. So it's going to take some work of kind of pulling from various places with that clone stamp to kind of take away that weird pattern look. Again, like I said, these are the photos that you want to use. This is the amount of work you want to do for kind of your grade A big photos, but not necessarily something for every photo. So use it sparingly, but it's a really cool tool that's really helpful to create interesting images that are a little bit different. So the third trick that I want to show is kind of it's a combination of tools actually. If you've been paying attention to Lightroom lately, they've released their new masking tool, which is super helpful and super cool. Once again, I'm just going to quickly, this is with the R6, so I'm going to quickly throw on that preset onto this photo, just like so. If you see up in the upper right, you can see that those exposures is moving up and down, all that kind of stuff. I use a tool called pFixer, and what that does is that it copies, or it enables me to have a bunch of keystrokes that make adjustments. So here just with my left hand, D will decrease the exposure, F increases the exposure, A decreases the contrast, S brings it back, V and C adjust other things. And so with it, it allows me to jump through and quickly edit a lot of photos without really having to use the mouse very much. But where this really is actually useful is when it comes in here with the masking. And so I can go into here and I'm going to go select subject. It's going to create that new mask right on the couple. So it's done. It did a decent job. What's really helpful here is that the pFixer with like those classic tools still work even while I'm within this masking feature. And so if I'm going in here and I want to just be working on the couple, I can be using my left hand here, or my right hand here on the mouse and adjusting their settings. Well, on my left hand, I'm adjusting the global setting. Obviously, this is too much. That looks awful. But I can be doing this where I'm bringing down the whole scene, but increasing them on the other one. Or we can go the opposite way, and I want it to be really dark. I want them to be silhouetted or something like that. But it means that especially when you're working on a laptop like this, going up and down, sliding between sliders and stuff like that can be an enormous pain. And so by having this kind of a tool that allows me to go back and forth in there, so just so that those little kind of tiny adjustments, which would actually be more useful, while still also allowing myself to be able to make global adjustments with my other hand. It's just a really nice combination. Now, the last tip is one that's a little bit more social media focused. I kind of like the look of the square, using the square so that people can see a whole photo when they're scrolling through your profile. And there are a lot of apps to do that if you're going to be doing it on your phone. As the photos are already living in Lightroom, I created a tool that makes it a lot easier to be able to just launch those as a square photo with about a 10% extra space around them. So the way I do it is using the print module. So let's take this one here that I was working on. And all I do is I go into the print module in here, and I've definitely created it as a favorite, but I will do it first here. So I'm going to open the page setup, and any printer, it doesn't matter. We're going to manage custom sizes. So I've made this one. It's called, I just say it's a 6x6 just to know what it is, because the math's nice and easy. And then to have 10% off, I need to take 0.6 of an inch off. So I have 0.3 off the top, 0.3 off the bottom, right on either of those. And that creates that 6x6 square right in there. Then I've turned my margins that same down to that 0.3. It's a 1-to-1 image, and it creates it just like so. Then when I was done, I went over here and saved it on favorites and made the thing. So that looks good, and that looks like exactly what I want to be exporting for social media. So all I'd have to do down here is go down to print job and just change that to JPEG file, and it should have it here as print to file, and you can just share where you want it to be. So the only downside of this tool is that it doesn't actually work with smart previews. So this is the thing that only I can do off of my main computer. So like I said, I'm not any sort of some crazy Lightroom expert, but I found these to be really helpful tools for me. If you find them useful, please let me know in the comments below, or if there's other tools that you would like me to take a look at. Yeah, it'd be awesome, and I'd love the feedback. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you around.